This is St. Pete X, affectionately known as SPX. SPX brings you St. Pete's brightest business people, civic leaders, and citizens who share their insight and expertise as well as their love of our great city. SPX is presented by the St. Petersburg Group. Head to stpete.co to check out more episodes, and by St. Pete's most effective marketing agency, Big C. Browse to bigc.co to see their work. Now enjoy the conversation. Hey, this is Joe Hamilton. I'm here with Mitzi Jo Gordon. It's great to see you. It's been a while.
Hello. I am happy to be here. It's good to see you too.
Mitzi has a reputation for being involved in a lot of stuff. She is a high capacity, high functioning person. And now the involvement has gotten so big that she actually has a book in front of her with all the things that she's doing written down just so she can keep track. I mean, when is it too much?
I've asked myself that. It's important to keep a lot of lists.
Yes.
You keep lists, you can do much more with your time. And, there's definitely a priority system in my list. Some of the passion projects maybe wait a little bit longer than others.
And to your classic style, it's actually a proper journal book and not Evernote or something like that.
Yeah, it is a hard copy book, well worn. Started out as kind of a sketchbook, but being a person of words, it just naturally morphed into this. But I do admittedly have a hard time saying no. As a creative person, I get inspired by things.
Yeah, I hear you. Cool. So let's start going down the list. What's taking up the most of your time right now?
So primarily my work. The things that I do get paid for, because I take on a lot of volunteer projects as well. But I'm working with a couple different people to write copy for their websites, define their mission. So kind of this space between copywriting and consulting. It's not just about the text, but about getting into the concept. So working with the Nomad Art Bus to redo the content on their website and have it be more focused on what's actually going on with them and the impact. Like I think their language had been kind of more general, and I want to help them tell their story. Their story is so rich and interesting. Also, Pep Rally is a creative firm that's based in Tampa that I work with a lot on individual client projects. And it may be anywhere from writing the mission and value statement, press releases, and website content for a new business that they're helping by creating the logo and designing the interiors. I kind of come on to their team as a writer and apply my skills to the different projects that they take on. And I like that because it's always something different.
Sure.
Every month, it's a new challenge. And I think I need that.
Do you have a process that you can speak to, creative process, and when you go meet with the Nomad Art Bus folks?
My process stems from my experience as a journalist. So no matter how creative-minded the work is, I always approach it from that research perspective. And so it's about interviewing and listening and collecting information, and then starting to see what kind of themes develop from that. Also, there's outside research. So not just speaking to people within, whether it's the client within the company or within the organization like Nomad, but also doing my own outside research, looking at similar projects, thinking about how these clients may be different and, where they fit within the market. So yeah, a lot of research. I tend to collect way more than I need and then start to whittle it down. That's when the editor hat goes on.
And Carrie, I think she's doing some things with Ridge now. Which is interesting. Yeah, Ridge is a cool company.
She's a visual recorder, a really talented one. And she now flies all over the country doing awesome on-the-spot drawings for them.
Very nice.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah, really fun. So yeah, mostly in that area. My background is in journalism, but I tend to prefer to work in these arenas. I don't so much do journalistic writing anymore. Probably going to start doing a little arts coverage for a local direct mail publication called Green Bench Monthly.
Great. I read some of their stuff recently.
So I'm excited about that. They're new and I love new projects.
What do you know about the origins of that? I know that the folks there, the ownership agreement, they're investing, or they're part of Equator, I think, a little bit, or?
She did mention that. Yeah. So I just met with Ashley. They're a couple that owns the publication. They've had it for about a year.
Are they tied to the brewery?
They are not. And I did not have an opportunity to ask her, how did that shake out? Just in terms of a branding issue, or, is there some sort of copyright issue? But as I say, they've been around for a year, so I'm sure it's already come up.
Well,
I just
the
didn't.
benches have been around longer than the brewery anyway, so.
Right. So there's that. She did mention at Cultura, she specifically brought me in because they're interested in arts coverage and they're looking for somebody that has their hands in a lot of projects like me to be able to bring information to them from the community. So they're excited about the festival. They're going to be sponsoring it in, I don't know to what degree, so I don't want to speak to that, but.
Oh, so you're committing to a major sponsorship from them. I appreciate that. No, just teasing. And then you've got the Shine Festival is a big piece of your time as well.
Mm-hmm. And we're a volunteer committee that I'm really happy to be on. We're going into our third year and again are going to bring 16 new murals to the city. The date has pushed back some. This year it's going to be October 5th through the 14th. For a number of reasons, weather and scheduling with other activities going on within the city. So that's nice, gives us a little bit more time to work with. So we're out meeting with some potential sponsors now as well. My area on the committee tends to focus on traditional media. So press releases, scheduling television appearances, that type of thing. And then off paper, I also, because I can't help it, get my hands involved with the community projects. So looking at putting a mural in a St. Pete school, hopefully, with pep rally, and possibly some other just fun, colorful event-based stuff like bringing the Karmada art car program in for a parade, or maybe just like a parking lot party connected to, last year we painted the street intersection. Karmada is a fun kind of connection to that idea. Again, taking the murals and putting them onto these objects or these unusual surfaces. My other passion project of going on 5 years now is continuing to grow in Tampa. So that's where the primary festival now takes place every year during Gasparilla Festival of the Arts. We had the biggest footprint so far just this past March in terms of our presence in Kylie Garden and how the art car show was integrated with the overall festival. Because when it started, we were working with grant money from the Arts Council of Hillsborough County. It was specifically designated for expansion of the festival footprint in a way that incorporated local creative people. And I had just had my car painted as an art car around that time. And that was what gave me the idea. I was like, I know there's more people that are out here doing this. It's got a fun, like Florida vibe, painted cars. And so let's give it a try. And the first year, it was literally just like 6 art cars, 2 being painted live up in Kylie Garden and kind of nothing else going on around us. And, fast forward 4 years later, this past March, the festival actually relocated the entire emerging artists area up into Kylie Garden. And because they moved it, we're able to add more emerging artists. So normally they host 10, and this year they hosted 15. Also, the art collectors in training and children's activities tents were moved up into Kylie Garden. And signage, balloons, and more connectivity between that area and the main festival, which just has the artist tents down in Curtis Hickson Park. So that was really gratifying to see our growth and see it reach that point where it's being fully embraced and really feels like a part of the festival that's important and that has achieved its goals, because it's enabled the festival itself to expand, and adding even just those 5 tents in the emerging artist section represents a significant opportunity for those
50%
artists.
growth. Anybody's happy with that?
Yeah. So really excited for 2018 and hoping to bring in some new partners and have even more crazy art activities going on up there. We had 6 cars being painted live this year, and that was a spectacle, and they all came out incredibly. We have this really fun moment at the end of the festival. We're the first ones to leave the park, actually, because otherwise the cars would get trapped while all the people in the tents are trying to break down for hours and hours. Kind of once they clear the aisle, they let all the Karmada cars down out of Kylie, and it's this little mini parade.
Nice.
And it gets a little wilder every year. So that's been fun.
That's fun. It's really great. Feels good to create something and see it just grow. And
yeah, and to help artists even in a small way, because the grant funding is still coming from the Arts Council of Hillsborough County to help support that ongoing program. And I'm from that grant given a budget that I use to pay artists to paint cars, pay a DJ to provide entertainment. I would say all but maybe 5% of my budget goes toward supporting directly these local creative people. So that's also really gratifying.
That is, and that's a big number. That's more than a lot of nonprofits achieve. So
I can do a lot with a little.
Yeah.
That's that comes from experience.
You've always been involved in a ton of stuff, but even more so now that you've taken your administrative hat off and enjoying the freedom of being able to move back and forth as you wish. And how's that process moving away from Creative Pinellas to having a lot of different opportunities? How's that been for your soul?
It's been really good. It's been very freeing. I mean, of course, I'm really grateful for the time that I had there. And I know that the experience that I gained just in that short time and the people that I met, the different communities that I was able to visit are the foundation upon which what I'm doing now, because it just gave me this running start. But my personality is really better suited to work outside of the administrative field, particularly like arts administration. Because I'm so creative, I really tend to want to get more hands-on as opposed to structural. However, it helped increase my skills in that area. So I feel better equipped to know how to achieve the things I want to achieve with some of these projects because of that time. And seeing what's happened with Creative Pinellas in the subsequent 2 years since I left has also been a really great thing to see, because I left at a sensitive time. And that was a choice that I made for a number of reasons. The stress of that job was definitely having an adverse effect on my daily life. And part of that was because of the way the job was structured at the time. Certainly, it's an inherently stressful position to be the director of any local arts agency for a region the size of Pinellas County. However, at that time, it was also kind of just me. I had some resources that I could draw on, but I was the only full-time contractor. There was no official paid staff. The agency was still very young, and the board leadership had made a decision to keep the employees not as officially employees. And I had a part-time person who worked with me on strictly the media content, which was my role prior to becoming the director. So I also felt like I had already had my hand in the shaping of all of it. And as the director, that really started to become a little bit heavier of a burden as I went on, just for one person to try to do everything that was needed. Ultimately, my focus became specifically attaining some funding from the county, which was a success.
Yes, it was. I remember that. I think that's right around when we met. I remember I could see the stress, and it was visceral. And then luckily the relief when you were successful. It was a huge undertaking.
And something different from anything I'd ever done before. Incorporating certain of my skills, but also this huge learning experience. And I was really fortunate to have some solid mentors by my side during those times to help me through a greater understanding of the political processes that were involved. And when I chose to leave, again, largely driven by like stress-related sicknesses that I was dealing with, but also a feeling of kind of having my hands tied a little bit, because we got this funding and I had developed a very specific budget related to the funding, but was then, and this happens, doing some arm wrestling with the board of directors as they were structured at the time. It's a very different board now, 2 years later. I'll get to that. About how our funding would be spent, which was frustrating to me naturally, because here's the budget and we all agreed on it, but now I wasn't able to enact the things that I wanted. And I felt like I'd already climbed this mountain and I wasn't getting the support that I really needed. And I was just kind of burnt out. And I knew that if I hung on, I may wind up not where I want to be with this group. I knew that some board development needed to take place, but that takes time. It takes years. And essentially saying, okay, I crossed the finish line. I got us to this point. I've turned the boat around, so to speak. And now the agency has some funding, has a little more visibility, and a growing support base. When, frankly, when I came on, it was still viewed very negatively, because for anyone that doesn't know the history, if I can provide the history in brief, Pinellas County had a cultural affairs department for about 30 years. And during the economic depression, 2008, 9, 10, it was slowly dismantled down to nothing. And then seed funding from its dismantling was provided for the creation of a shoestring agency, independent, so not a county department as that was, but an independent agency designated as a local arts agency designed to ostensibly do the same work, but with a fraction of the budget and one contract employee. And some of the people who were on the board at that time and who were part of making the decision to create that agency wanted to keep things scaled small for their own reasons. They thought the other agency got too big, too much money was being spent. Many people argued, well, this is a culturally rich area that we need to spend that money and continue to invest in our arts resources. A lot of debate about that back and forth, But anyway, so by the time I inherited this agency, a lot of the people whom it would serve were really frustrated. They felt like they weren't getting the services that they needed from their local arts agency. And I kind of learned that the hard way. And I started a listening tour. I thought, well, the best way that I can really get my hands around this is to go out and hear from people. What do they want? What do they need? And then that became the campaign for county funding. Fast forward to where I was. We got the funding. The agencies viewed a little more positively because I went out into the community and talked. It wasn't just this, well, who is this person and what are they doing? And kind of put them on a little more stable footing. And then it was basically like, all right, now I'm giving the ball back to you. And you can take it and run with it and do something great, or you can argue amongst yourselves and let it all fall apart. And so that was sort of my statement of, I've done what I can for this, but I can't be involved in any of the infighting. And I'm really happy to say that it was a catalyst. My decision to do that forced them to take certain actions. They brought in a new director as well as 2 other contracted staff. So they wound up with a total of 4, and they began to put together some granting and specifically fellowship programs, which is different from a traditional grant because it doesn't come with all of the strings attached, not project-based. So it's really an infusion of support for the artists who receive it. And they had to show results to the county commission because the commission is like, well, we just agreed to give you this money. And so it took some great steps forward, due in no small part to some of the people who they brought in to work on projects there. Specifically, I'm thinking of Elizabeth Brinklow, who was with the city of St. Pete for so many years, managing cultural affairs here. She came in to oversee that granting piece and really made it a smart and helpful program. And that just continues to grow. And their board also has shifted. They brought in some new voices to kind of outweigh some of the dissenting voices that wanted to scale the agency small and thus have slowly kind of rolled off. And it's opened them up to really embrace many of the things that I was getting pushback on. So there's a creative arts summit that's coming up next month. Creative Pinellas is hosting in partnership with several other arts agencies, North Pinellas Cultural Alliance, Clearwater Cultural Alliance, etc. And it's basically a day-long event at the Epicenter up in Largo area to reveal the results of a year-long economic impact study, looking at business impact of arts activities. This is something that we all know is a real thing, but a couple of years ago, I was getting pushback on whether or not there was value in conducting such a study. And that was kind of one of the final straws for me because I was like, it absolutely has to happen. If we're just now getting, and again, this is 2015, county funding for the arts again, for the first time in 5 years, when the county and, more specifically this city, but overall, there's definitely a wealth of cultural assets countywide. And everybody in the marketing arena who markets this region as a destination is including those assets and those cultural activities in their messaging, then why not the funding? Because it would stand to reason that everyone already knows, of course, the arts mean business. But there was some tug of war on that. Again, I think from people who just wanted to keep the arts side scaled small.
What was it? What was their, why did they say?
They were seeing a return on investment. A lot of that.
Just anti-bureaucracy kind of vibe, or?
A lot of the commentary I was getting from people on the board at that time was not really backed up with a lot of
Emotional.
Yeah. So it left me wondering, like, I don't understand. You're
Right.
on this board. Why wouldn't you support this? Well, it's just too much money. Oh, it's not something that we want to invest in because an economic study obviously costs money.
Well, how was the board formed initially? What's the ownership structure? If they ejected it out of government ownership?
As an independent nonprofit agency. So by the boundaries of their bylaws.
Who chose? How did the initial board form?
I'm not 100% sure.
Was it mostly people out of the city, or was the city run the process?
No. I was not a part of the agency at that time. The previous director to me was more involved with it from the inception level. I just know from who was on the original board that it was a pretty wide representation in terms of geographically, somebody from different parts of the county, north, south, central.
So some thought sounds like it went into that at least.
It did. I just think that particularly some people that had a person I'm thinking of in particular.
John
I'm
Doe.
not going to name
John
any
Doe.
names. I mentioned that the former Cultural Affairs Department had been dismantled. This was primarily done through the actions of a specific county commissioner. And that person got onto the Creative Pinellas board. So if that person was basically saying, we're spending too much money on the arts, this agency is overblown, we're giving away grants to these artists, but what's the value? And questioning that. And that's kind of the message that this person was delivering sort of throughout their tenure on the board. They're no longer on the board. You know, it was a little confusing because then I'm trying to make this agency thrive and grow, and I'm hitting these walls. So that was one of the biggest challenges. And frankly, I don't know how that all coalesced at the beginning. I inherited the board along with everything else when I became the director. I did do one very important piece of board recruitment. And I believe that the person who I recruited to be part of the board really helped in tipping the vote, so to speak, and bringing in later after I left other important voices that helped. And I think the crucial difference there between him, this is Ken Rollins, and some of the other people who were already on the board from the inception of the agency is that he was really embedded in the regional art scene. He had been director of the Gulf Coast Museum of Art. He was interim director of the Tampa Museum of Art. He's an independent arts firm, a little bit more finger on the pulse and not just conceptually. And certainly there were other people, Kathy Monahan, who was very involved in North County. Unfortunately, though, you know, she had a lot of scheduling commitments, and so her voice wasn't always present when it was
Did the board
needed.
grow, or did it always swap somebody out?
It pretty much stayed the same
Which
up
was-
until,
about how big was
which
it?
was like
Nine people.
nine-ish people. But, you know, what that means is 4 are showing up to the meetings. And that wasn't enough. And then I needed more people who are really understanding of the needs of the artist and the shape of the scene. And that was somebody like Ken. After I left the agency, some of the other people he recruited also had that difference from some of the other board members where they were a little more entrenched and thus, you know, could bring that voice to the table. Because prior to that is my little voice, you know, against some pretty intimidating figures who are looking for potentially, I think, something that they weren't going to find. Although, well, ironically, I think that economic impact study that I wanted to undertake, which eventually did get undertaken following my departure, was intended to do just that, was to provide them with this type of ROI data that they're seeking. I guess what I meant by my comment is that I didn't feel like there was really going to be any pleasing them. It was a philosophical difference in terms of how they wanted to spend money and how the money was really needed by the people that we're saying we're trying to serve, the agencies that we're saying we're trying to serve. And I know you always have to strike a balance because you can't make everybody happy. But yeah, I took it as far as I could. And I'm really happy to see that it has continued to stabilize and provide more programming that's useful to artists, you know, business skills, information, and that types of programming, as well as continue to expand these granting and fellowship programs that I know are helping people in a real concrete way.
It's a nice legacy.
Thank you. Thanks.
One of the things I love that you mentioned was the conversation tour that you went on. That's a really cool idea. Participated in something, a weirdly bureaucratic version of that for when we were working on the T-BARTA site about transportation, and we did some Greenlight Pinellas stuff. We were working on their website, and you know, it was a cool experience to do. And I know that you recently have done sort of a variation on that. Can you talk a little about the events you've been hosting?
Yeah. So at the beginning of this year, I hosted 5 conversations called Creative Placeholding. And there's a public Facebook group now called Creative Placeholding Tampa Bay, where people are invited to share research and information on this topic. The conversations were really designed to just get a diverse group of voices into one room together. The idea was sparked when I came back from my last trip to Miami. I go to Miami, pretty consistently at least once a year since like 2004 or 2005 when I began going to Art Basel in December. It's so close by and it's such an international event. It seems counterintuitive for myself as someone who works in the creative industries to not be down there and somehow either be presenting a project or be at least meeting people and connecting with what's going on. So I make it a point to go down there. And over those years, obviously I've seen a lot of changes happen. And very quickly, all things considered, because Basel really only started in like 2003 or 2004. So fast forward just over a decade, and it is exponentially greater in volume, in impact, and positive or negative. It depends on who you ask. So one of the things that I observed on my most recent visit was in the Wynwood district. And I had the year before been interviewing some people about how the festival is impacting them, impacting their business, impacting where they live and how that looks. And then also following some street artists to see what their experience is like just at the ground level of like, there's stuff happening here. We're going to come down and try to make stuff happen too. There's so many mixed feelings around this festival. And I'm sorting through all of that on my way home this last time and thinking about what I saw and all the things that I heard and kind of laying that next to a lot of the commentary that I heard when I was with Creative Pinellas. As the director of the county's local arts agency, you hear a lot of ideas and a lot of desires, a lot of comparisons. One of the ones that I tended to hear a lot was Art Basel, Miami. Bring that festival here, create the next Art Basel here, or something along those lines. When is this going to happen, or how come we're not doing something like that? My take on that was that we're not Miami. We don't have the same tax base that Miami does, and we don't have the same collecting scene that Miami does. And you have to go down there and see it and see how it's different to really understand that, I think, if you're literally just viewing it from outside. And so what I wanted to do, where this all really started, was come back and show, here's a case study. Let's look at Wynwood. Let's look at Miami as a case study. And here's what's happened here over the last 12 years from a couple different perspectives. Certainly there are numerous threads there. And then have a conversation about what lessons we can learn so that maybe,
It seems like a deep conversation.
Oh, it was.
Did the general, to me, that's the conversation that the general public, I don't know if, did you get traction?
We had standing room only at the first one.
Yeah, sure.
Now, granted, it was at the studio at 620. It was an accessible place. It's,
well, I'm sure people will come to it. It's just, that's a deep, again, I think that's almost like it's a leadership conversation, if that makes sense. It's a strategy conversation. It's a business and administrative and
right. Yeah. And as sometimes happens with my projects too, I'm coming into this with a lot of energy and excitement, not peeling back the surface all the way, like knowing, okay, this is going to be a huge conversation, but not knowing where it's going to take us and kind of having to be okay with that too. So I had the first one in January, right after I got back.
That was at 620?
Yeah. More than 100 people came. And we just had this tiny little panel, it's like 6 people. And I showed a short film that's a student film, but a quality one about gentrification issues in Wynwood specifically, and how some of the development and what they were calling art washing was pushing out some of the original residents of, for example, Miami's oldest Puerto Rican community.
So art washing, can you define?
So that's a term for when a developer specifically and strategically utilizes art, be it public art, murals, art events, as a way of like developing audience and improving a property and bringing in interest into an area. The slightly negative connotation that you hear there has to do with potentially taking advantage of the artists and doing it without a broader plan in mind. It's literally just like a technique. Like, oh, well, these warehouses were really cheap, so I had to buy them. I didn't know what I was going to put in them. But, let's just throw some murals up there and get some warm bodies in there. Let's do something hip and cultural. And then the people will come and we'll start to make more money. And the audiences, too, that developers in this category are trying to cultivate aren't necessarily resident audiences. And this is something else that this film dealt with. It's a film called Right to Wynwood, as in who has the right to Wynwood. And there were interviews with residents of the area who were like, we went to the galleries and they literally were like, you're not coming in. And feeling like it wasn't a creative effort that reached out to the residents, but rather was designed to supplant. So it presented that point of view, again, as a case study, as an example of here's what happened in one city that I happen to know that people compare us to a lot or aspire to be more like in certain ways. And this has changed some over the last few years. The conversation has changed, and St. Petersburg has also changed. But I wanted to present that point of view, and I wanted to present some voices that I felt like were talking about these issues, again, in different places. You know, oh, this person's talking in this restaurant, and you overhear it at a bar, and you overhear it in a living room, and the topic is coming up, but they're not all in the same room. And maybe this person would benefit from hearing what that person has to say.
Did you feel like some of the art initiatives in St. Pete were bordering on art washing? Was that a concern that made you, or was it more just the study of the process of gentrification?
It was more just the process and concerns about us aspiring to be like Miami, purely from that sort of feedback that I had received when I was with Creative Pinellas. You know, I can't point to a project now and say, I feel like that's happening. But I also think that in any place where there's very cheap commercial property or a lot of revitalization going on, that the danger always exists. And so it's important to look at that too, and for people to put some thought behind some of those efforts. Thought in regard to how the residents are impacted, how the artists are impacted, as well as what the overall area or district is going to look like in the future. And I specifically called it creative place holding, as opposed to a more familiar term that you may hear in relation to some of these topics, which is creative place making, because I felt that our place is in many ways already made. Certainly we're growing, there's development going on, but the things that make St. Petersburg culturally rich and interesting and desirable, they're already here.
Mm-hmm.
I love Bob Devin Jones's comment about magic dirt. What is it that, you know, St. Pete has that no other place has? He says magic dirt, because it's almost ineffable. I mean, you can't really put your finger on any one thing. And, you know, I've attended, there was a recent chamber function with the Grow Smarter initiative. And they were talking about, you know, that we want to hang on to that quality. I hear this in Ybor City too. I've done some reporting on economic development over there. Of course, that district has been through many changes from arts into business, and then they wanted it to get back more into the arts, but it's hard to get the artists in because rents had been driven up. So our place is made, in a sense. We don't have to go in and create a thing where nothing exists. Rather, it was my feeling that we need to hold on to that character, what it is that makes this creative place so interesting and desirable. And how can we do that? Another comment that I returned to a lot was related to me secondhand. So I can't quote the originator, but the comment was that gentrification is like a storm, which is to say that you can't stop it. That maybe, okay, if gentrification is a dirty word, then change, progress, development. It's the hurricane and it's coming as soon as you have this magic combination of factors. A place with the right charm, the right size, and the right kind of real estate market. So what do? If you know a storm is coming, you identify the things that you want to preserve, and you take steps to hold on to those things. And maybe you can't save everything, but if you save the right things, then you don't tip the balance toward vanilla, you know, is the concept. So we had 5 of these conversations, and they moved around to different locations that I was looking to highlight. I'm on hiatus right now for the summer. The Facebook group continues and research continues. I actually just recently went through and highlighted in great depth a report from Seattle about the creation and preservation of cultural spaces, and 30 new ideas, some of them sky high, some of them very achievable, for things that that city might be able to do to preserve and also improve some of their cultural spaces. And I thought, wow, again, case study, great. This is an issue that happens all over the world, right? So I have no shortage of research to dig into. So using the summer for research and thinking about how to take the conversation to the next level.
Did you record any of these?
I didn't record them for sound.
Right.
I did bring in a graphic recorder. It was Carrie.
Yeah.
And she very graciously donated her time. So I have a visual documentation from 3 of the 5 sessions. As I say, these did move around, and in analyzing what came out of the conversations, all of the comments that I got, which of course were coming from a lot of different directions. And the conversations touched on everything from how the artist makes money and how do we create a successful buyer's market to issues of race and, how the city is divided and people talking about wanting a place at the table but feeling disenfranchised and all of those emotions. Basically, I'm looking at what we learned and planning for the fall to hopefully bring in some outside voices from other places like Miami, or, we have someone here who recently moved from Portland who hopefully I'm going to get together and learn some things from, and maybe could bring him in as a presenter, because I think the more of that kind of perspective that we can get, the better off that we'll be. Also, I want to create some consistency in the location and the scheduling so that we can better build an audience for these conversations, because who's sitting in the chairs listening to the panelists is equally, if not even sometimes more important than who's on the actual panel, because that's where you're going to get these
action.
Different viewpoints. That's where you're going to get action. So yeah, right now I'm in the study phase and we're looking to pick like maybe 1 or 2 locations where it'll alternate, do it on a consistent basis so that it's this day every month, and drop in and participate in the conversation. And that's an important point too for me, is that because early on I was pinged a little bit for not having some sort of action plan. And people got this impression that, wow, you're just getting everybody riled up, but you don't know what to do about it. I was like, well, I don't have the solutions. And I guarantee you there's not a speaker that's going to come in here that will. However, to me, and this goes back to my roots again in journalism, the conversation itself has great value. And we learn things. We learn things from each other, and connections are made. Even, an awareness of somebody else's situation that might, I should reach out to them. And that is the part about it that really excites me. I mean, does it mean that there won't, someday come some concrete idea out of this? Like, a community benefits agreement, and we're going to push for that. And, that might happen, but
it may have already happened. You don't know who's taking what they learned and thought about and the new ideas that were planted in their head and taking them into their life. And I'm sure there's change that's come out of that for the better.
I mean, I still hear from a lot of people who participated early on, and that's where that Seattle report was brought to me by someone who's vested in this and wants to see these conversations continue. And that's what I bring to it, is I feel like I can hold this space for these different people to come into and have an intelligent and respectful discourse about what is a difficult and touchy subject.
Yeah. It's complex, and people have feelings, and being able to articulate those feelings in their complexity is a huge value in and of itself. Do you feel gentrification happening? Maybe you look back over time and you say, I felt one way then, I felt this way now. And you see projects and you're like, that's another big building, and it has a certain feeling to it. And because it happens at such a glacial pace sometimes, and sometimes faster and slower, that you can sometimes only feel it when you're really looking back. But if by then it's often too late, right? So being able to get that, I won't say warning signs, but just, having that mindset to be wary of it and to be aware of it more than wary. Wary is probably a little bit too negative of a word, but be aware of it. And that is probably your best protection against it, right?
Absolutely. And there's real opportunity for education as well, because we bring in a former city council member, or even in Pinellas Park, the mayor, to talk about how some of these processes happen at the city level, because a lot of time that's where the finger gets pointed. And it gives people a chance to have at least a better understanding directly from some of these people about, well, here's how it works from our end, and here's some of the things that we can do, and here's, where it's coming from development side. And in general, it's about promoting an understanding, giving people also a chance to be heard, and hopefully planting some seeds for good things to happen.
And I was on the verge of going to a couple. I will definitely commit to being at any of the next ones that you do.
Thank you.
They're really cool. And it might be a good candidate for Facebook Live, something to set up a webcam and just let it roll. And
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, we'll look for us to get it cranking again once the summer has ended.
So I've enjoyed our time. We've covered a lot of stuff. One thing, just a repeating sort of question I ask, just because, and especially I'm interested to hear yours, because you're, your boots on the ground so much. Who is someone, what's an entity or a person or an effort that you feel like is doing amazing things for St. Pete, but hasn't gotten enough attention or would benefit from a little extra appreciation or attention? It doesn't have to be just one, but if you've got one that jumps out at you, I'd love to love to give a shout out kind of vibe.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, the first one that comes to my mind is the Nomad Art Bus. I'm not sure how much attention they really get. I mean, I see it because it's on my radar, but I still encounter people that have never heard of it before. And this is something that I feel is really operating true to mission, a very clear mission, and really connecting and serving such a diversity of audiences. And it blows me away how much they have grown and what they've been able to achieve in the time that they've been around. So Carrie Boucher sent me a Facebook message or an email before she had a bus because she had heard about my book bus. I do still have my little blue bookmobile, which I know we didn't talk about, but it's out there. It doesn't get out as much as it used to, but I'll be taking it down to Miami in November for the Miami Book Fair. So that's exciting. So I had this bus project locally, a creative community project, and Carrie had reached out. She's like, I'm thinking about doing this project and maybe you can talk me out of it. And of course I didn't. It's like, you absolutely have to do it. It's fantastic.
I never say no to an idea. Why should you?
Right. You asked the wrong lady. And so I feel like I've been able to watch it grow from her initial concepts to, they have their second bus. The first one, not a fleet. The first one was put to rest.
Got it.
And now they have their second one, which is really nice, new, able to provide all the services that they were wanting to use the old vehicle for, but they were bound by the confines of it's an old bus. I feel like they have really clear, strong vision. And as I said, they're really enacting that vision. And the programs that they do have such impact. And they're working with people in halfway houses. They're working with developmentally disabled. They're working with Head Start in Hillsborough County, with, which is the pre-K program for people in economically challenged situations. They're really out there connecting. And that's why they have a bus and what they were designed to do. And then, they're not just for disadvantaged audiences. They're also, taking it to private schools. Sure. And the funding that they get from some of those opportunities helps pay for them being able to visit a place that couldn't pay for it.
Sure.
So it's just a really smart model. And the people that are behind it, from the board to the teachers to, Carrie herself, are very thoughtful about every aspect and where they put their effort and what they support. And I just think it's such an incredible and rich cultural program that gets out into the streets. And that has its own particular magic because they can connect with so many more audiences that way. So such a diverse range of people, adults to kids, to every economic level, to, every type of neighborhood and situation. And I think that has a lot of value. And of course, they go Bay Area. So St. Pete is just one part of what they do. And that may be why, like I said, I still encounter people that haven't even heard about this. But I feel like they're very present here.
Yeah, and that's a great shout out. I think that when people see them at the festivals, like, oh yeah, and the big light goes on, and then the challenge is just getting people to think about them between the events where they see them, so that when it would be a good fit to bring them in, it's top of mind. Which I'll look forward to seeing the work that you do with her and the content to accomplish that. I think we put her shirts on stpetethreads.com, and so if you want to support them, they're available there. And I think we actually still have the shirts that we did for Creative Pinellas are still
That's
on
wonderful.
there as well. Yeah,
I'll have to check. I love it.
Cool. Well, really enjoyed our time.
Me too. Thank you.
Good to catch up. Seems like forever, and as expected,
It goes fast.
Yeah. But you came in with a treasure trove of cool projects, and it's just great to know that you're out there in the community and throwing all this goodness out there. So thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot.
All right. Mitzi Jo Gordon, pleasure, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, I'll see you next time.
You made it to the end of another great episode. For show notes, head to stpete.co to the show notes page, which includes links to all the resources mentioned in the show, as well as quotes and key insights from the show and information about the guest and the host. Thanks again to our sponsor, Big C. Head to Big C, that's BIGSEA.co to check out their work. And if you like what you heard, make sure to share this episode on social media and leave a comment. See you next time.